Montana Territory, summer of 1883. The stagecoach door burst open mid-descent, and the woman inside hit the ground hard, clutching her child as dust swallowed them whole. The wagon thundered off, spooked horses galloping, leaving behind silence and a crumpled figure in the sagebrush. The woman did not move at first. Blood trickled just below her hairline, and her arm bent in a way it should not. But her child was crying. That was what made her lift her head. "Tilly," the little girl sobbed, voice shaking. "Mama, wake up." Tilly Jane Harper blinked against the sun. Her head pounded, her dress torn at the shoulder. But her daughter, 5-year-old Clara, was alive, scraped up and trembling in the dust. That was all that mattered. "I'm here," Tilly whispered. She pulled Clara into her good arm, holding her close despite the pain. The stage was gone. Her things were gone. No one had seen them thrown. No one would come back. She did not know how far they were from the nearest town. She pressed her forehead to Clara's tangled hair and whispered, "We're going to be all right." They were not. She knew that. Hours passed. The sun burned overhead. She tried to walk, but her leg would not hold weight, and the ache in her ribs told her something inside was not right. Clara grew quiet, too tired even to cry. They sat against a dry mesquite tree, waiting. And then hoofbeats. Tilly blinked up at the shape on horseback. The sun behind him made him seem larger than life, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He dismounted fast, boots hitting the dirt, and she saw that he was young, mid-20s, with a rifle slung against his back and worry already in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling beside her. "You hurt bad." She nodded slowly, then tried to speak, but her throat was dry. The man reached for the canteen at his hip, unscrewed the cap, and held it to her lips. "Drink. Slow." Tilly took a sip, then handed it to Clara, who drank like she had never seen water before. "I'm going to help you," he said gently. "My name's Owen McCrae. I've got a horse. I'll get you both out of here." Tilly's head swam, but she clutched Clara tighter. "Why would you help us?" Owen looked at her, then really looked. "Because you need it. And because I want to." He worked fast. Wrapped her arm with cloth torn from his own shirt, lifted her onto his horse with the kind of strength that felt solid and sure. He rode with her in front, Clara nestled between them. The ride was rough, but Tilly lost sense of time, her head against Owen's chest, the steady beat of his heart a rhythm she clung to. They reached his homestead near dusk, a small cabin tucked into the hills, with a fence line that needed fixing and a barn that leaned a little from one side. But it was home. And it was safe. Owen carried her inside and laid her on his narrow bed. "You're going to stay here," he said as he tucked a blanket around her. "You and your daughter. Until you're better." Tilly tried to protest, but her voice was weak. "You don't know us. You don't know what trouble we bring." Owen met her eyes. "You got thrown from a stagecoach with a child in your arms. That is not trouble. That is survival." He made Clara a bed on the floor with quilts and pillows, showed her how to feed the chickens in the coop, and made them stew from rabbit and potatoes. He sat by the fire with her that first night, not asking questions, just keeping the silence steady and kind. Tilly watched him from the bed. He moved with quiet purpose, like a man used to being alone but not hardened by it. There was something in him, warmth without expectation. She had not felt safe in a long time. That night, with Clara asleep and the fire low, Owen sat beside her bed and handed her a cup of warm tea. "My leg's broken," she murmured. "And maybe a couple ribs." "I figured," he said. "You need rest. Time." "I've got both." She looked at him in the firelight, her voice hoarse. "You do not know what you are getting into." Owen leaned back in the chair. "Maybe not. But I know what I saw. A mother protecting her child with her whole body. That tells me enough." Tilly blinked hard against the sting behind her eyes. She had been judged more times than she could count by men in suits, by women in towns, by the man who had left bruises on her arms before throwing her and Clara from that stage. But Owen, he had not asked where she came from. Not yet. Days passed. Then a week. Owen cared for her without complaint. He cooked, cleaned, helped Clara wash her hair with rainwater, and sat beside Tilly each evening with quiet eyes and stories of his childhood ranch in Wyoming. She learned he had lost both parents young, that he had built this place with his own hands, that he had ridden with cattle drives, but the land always called him home. Tilly listened, slowly letting herself relax into the rhythm of his days. One morning, Clara climbed into Owen's lap at breakfast, sticky with jam, and declared, "I want to stay here forever." Owen smiled, brushing her hair from her face. "You can stay as long as you want." Tilly's heart twisted. She had not known gentle men existed anymore. Later that evening, when Clara was asleep, Tilly looked at him across the fire and said, "You should know why we were on that coach." Owen nodded once. "All right. I was married," she said slowly. "Not by choice. He was cruel. When I tried to leave, he called me a thief and said Clara was not mine to take. We were running. He paid the driver to take us west, then had us thrown out on the trail." Owen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing harsh. Just looked at her with that same quiet steadiness. "I'm not looking for pity," Tilly added. "You're not getting it," he said. "You're getting a place to start over." She looked away, swallowing hard. "Why are you being so kind?" Owen stood slowly, walked to her, then knelt beside her chair. "Because I want to be," he said gently. "And because when I found you out there, I felt something I have not felt in a long time. Like maybe I was meant to come down that trail at that exact moment." Tilly's eyes filled. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. He took it slowly, wrapping his calloused fingers around hers. "You are safe here," he whispered. "You and Clara, for as long as you want." She did not say anything more that night, but she did not let go of his hand. Not until sleep came, and Owen stayed beside her, his hand warm in hers, the fire crackling low between them. The first rain came 4 days after Owen brought them back, a soft, steady soaking that turned the dust dark and made the roof creak in the night. Tilly lay awake, listening to the water run down the eaves. Clara curled against her side in the bed. Owen had given up without hesitation. The cabin smelled of damp wool and wood smoke, and something else, safety, maybe, or the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. By morning, the creek had risen, pulling stray branches downstream. Owen was already at the stove when Tilly sat up, her ribs stiff but less sharp than before. A faint trail of steam rose from the tin cup he slid across the table. "Boiled chicory," he said. "Closest thing to coffee I've got." Tilly took it with both hands, nodding her thanks. Clara was still asleep, her small form buried beneath quilts, her mouth slack in a way that made Tilly's throat tight. "You sleep at all?" Owen asked, keeping his voice low. "Some." He sat, tugging his suspenders off his shoulders. "I was thinking, if you're up to it, I could show Clara the calves. Had one born just before the rain." "She's never seen one," Tilly said, fingers tightening around the cup. "I don't think she's been on a ranch before." "Well," Owen said, "she'll fit in fine. She's got the kind of quiet that animals trust." Tilly glanced toward the door, where Owen had hung a towel to dry. "You always live alone out here?" "Mostly." He leaned back. "There was a time I thought I might ride back east. But the land here, it keeps me steady. I don't need much." "I used to think I needed more than I do," she whispered. "Turns out, not much can still feel like too much when it's the wrong kind." Owen didn't ask her to explain. He just nodded, like he understood something she hadn't said. Later that day, once the clouds cleared and the sun made steam rise from the wet grass, Owen lifted Clara onto the fence rail and pointed toward the barn. "She's in the back stall. Might be shy." Clara's eyes widened as they stepped inside. The calf was still wobbly, its coat slick with dried birth. Its mother eyed them warily, but didn't move. "She's beautiful," Clara breathed. Owen crouched beside her. "Wants to stand strong, but her legs don't quite know how yet. Takes time." Tilly watched from the doorway, her shawl pulled tight, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Owen caught her eye once, his mouth curving just slightly, not in amusement, but something closer to quiet satisfaction. That night, while Clara used a bit of twine Owen had given her to make knots by the fire, Tilly sat at the table sorting through split beans. Her fingers moved carefully, her broken arm still stiff in its sling. "You mentioned once you built this place," she said without looking up. "Started when I was 21, he replied. "Took 2 winters and 3 summers. Cut every board myself. Hauled the stone for the hearth from the ridge." She glanced toward the fireplace. "It's solid. I wanted something that would last." Tilly was quiet a moment. "My father was a cooper. Worked barrels for the rail yards. Said the secret to strength was in the curve too straight, and the wood would snap under pressure." Owen's eyes held hers. "You're curved, Tilly. You bent. That's why you're still standing." She folded her hands in her lap. I haven't felt like I was standing for a long time. You are now. They didn't speak again until Clara climbed into Tilly's lap, her braid half undone, her eyes heavy with sleep. Tilly rested her cheek against her daughter's hair and looked across the table. I never expected kindness from a stranger. I'm not a stranger anymore, Owen said. And he wasn't. The next day, Tilly asked if there was mending to be done. Owen brought out an old burlap sack filled with shirts and trousers that had seen better days. She sat on the porch with a needle between her fingers, the sun warm on her face, Clara gathering wildflowers by the fence. I could fix that gate, Owen said, nodding to the way it sagged on its hinge. Tilly didn't look up. If you tell me you're using that gate as an excuse to stay close by, I won't stop you. He chuckled, but softly. You've got a way of seeing straight through people. She kept sewing. Only when they're not hiding. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. He worked the gate slowly, the rasp of his file and the creak of the hinge mixing with the buzz of bees and the sound of Clara humming to herself. By evening, the shirts were mended and the gate swung clean. Tilly stood from her chair and stretched. It's strange, she said. How quickly this place feels like it's never been unfamiliar. Owen wiped his hands on his trousers. That's how I felt the moment I saw you. Tilly didn't speak, but she didn't look away, either. When night fell, the stars came out clear, and the air smelled of sage and earth. Owen brought out a second chair and sat beside her on the porch. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of something that had begun to root. Not fast, not loud, but real and lasting. The wind changed toward the end of the second week, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly metallic from the distant hills. Tilly noticed it as she stepped outside with the wash basin, her arms still bound, but steadier now. The air felt sharper, like the land was waiting for something. Owen was splitting kindling by the shed, his coat off despite the chill. His axe struck clean, rhythm sure, without hurry. Tilly watched a moment, then crouched beside the rain barrel to rinse the soap from Clara's dress. You ever think about going back? She asked, without turning. Owen paused mid-swing. To where? Wherever you came from before this. He set the axe down slowly. No, there's nothing behind me I want back. I used to think that, she said, wringing the fabric tight. But sometimes I wonder what parts of me I left behind that I might have needed. He stepped closer, wiping his hands on a rag. You didn't leave them. You carried them through. She drew in a breath, the cold biting deeper than she expected. I've been waiting to feel like myself again. But maybe I don't know what that even means anymore. You've changed, he said simply. Doesn't mean you lost who you are. Just means you survived something that tried to take it. Tilly stood, carefully, and handed him the wet dress. You always speak like that. Like you've been listening to the ground longer than the rest of us. He smiled, just a little. Being alone teaches you to hear what most folks miss. A gust of wind lifted her skirt hem. She pulled her shawl tighter. Clara's been asking how long we're staying. He folded the dress over the line. What did you tell her? That I didn't know? Because I didn't want to lie. He looked toward the horizon, where the slope dropped into cottonwood and scrub. There's nothing waiting out past that ridge that's better than what's here. She studied his face. You mean for me? Or for you? He met her eyes, steady and quiet. Both. That night, Clara crawled into Owen's lap with a small wooden horse she'd found in the bottom of a crate. One of its legs was broken clean off. She held it up solemnly. Can you fix her? She asked. He turned it over in his hands. I can try, but she won't run the same. That's all right, Clara said. She's not running anywhere. She just needs a place to stay. Owen nodded. Then we'll give her one. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. Tilly watched them from the table, her mending laid aside, and something in her chest settled. Not all breaks needed to be hidden. Some could be mended in plain sight. The next morning, she asked Owen if he had spare paper. I want to draw the house for Clara, she said. So she'll remember it if we ever leave. We don't have to talk about leaving, he said quietly, setting a folded sheet beside her. Not unless it's what you want. She traced the cabin's lines with charcoal, her strokes slow. I don't know what I want. Not yet. But I know what I feel when I see you with her. When I hear her laugh again. Owen stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded. I don't want to be just a place you pass through. I know. He didn't look at her. The wind tugged at his collar, and the only sound was the creaking of the barn doors swinging loose on one hinge. She set the drawing aside and walked to him. My whole life, I've been someone else's decision. My father's, then his. Even the preacher's when he handed me off like I was livestock. She swallowed. I want to choose this time. Choose where I stay. Who I stand beside. Owen turned. You already have. She reached for his hand. Then say it plain. He brought her fingers to his lips, slow and reverent. Stay, Tilly. You and Clara. Build something here that no one else gets to touch. She nodded once, her eyes full and clear. Then we will. They stood like that as the sun crept over the ridge, the earth wet beneath their boots, the path ahead long but known. Behind them, Clara laughed as the wooden horse galloped one-legged across the floor. The gate swung on its new hinge. The hearth held its warmth. And for the first time, the future felt not like a hope, but like a promise. The first frost came early that year, sheeting the fields in pale silver before dawn. Tilly stood at the window in her shawl, watching Owen in the near dark as he led the mule toward the barn. The animal's breath curled into the cold air, and Owen moved with that familiar, quiet steadiness, shoulders squared, gait sure despite the slick ground. She hadn't told him yet, but she'd begun folding his shirts into the same drawer as Clara's things. It felt like a small ceremony, choosing what stayed close. Inside, the cabin held the warm scent of cornmeal and wood ash. Clara still slept in the bed, cheeks pink from the cold. Tilly stoked the fire gently, careful not to wake her, then set about kneading the dough she'd left covered the night before. Her arm ached less now. She could move it without wincing, though the break had healed crooked. It would never straighten fully again. By the time Owen stepped through the door, his boots crusted with frozen mud, the skillet was hot, and the bread rising. He took off his hat, shook the frost from it, and set it on the peg. You've been up long? He asked, voice rough from the cold. Not long, she said, dusting flour from her hands. I wanted to get ahead of the morning. The dough's holding better today. He shrugged off his coat and hung it beside hers. Smells like it. Owen poured himself a tin cup of water and leaned against the hearth to warm. His gaze lingered on the wood she had stacked by the stove, neatly ordered, smaller pieces on top, kindling tucked beneath. His voice was quiet when he spoke again. You ever think about tending land of your own? She looked up from the dough. Didn't think I'd be alive long enough to wonder. Well, I've been thinking, he said, slow and careful. There's a parcel north of the ridge. 5 acres, and used since the last were scare. Belongs to no one now. Just wild grass and alder. She stilled, her hands resting on the edge of the table. You thinking to build more? Thinking it might be good for Clara. Room to run. Grow things, if we wanted. Maybe milk goats, if we're feeling ambitious. Tilly turned toward the window, where a pale sun had begun to rise behind the ridge. That sounds like something a man says when he's already made up his mind. Owen stepped closer. Only if the woman standing beside him wants the same. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed the room and opened the small wooden box she kept by the wash basin. From it, she took out a folded scrap of lace, tattered but clean. Clara's christening cloth. I've carried this through every place that didn't want us, she said. It's never belonged to a home. Just a trunk, or a bag, or my coat pocket. She handed it to him. If I set this down here, it means I don't plan to carry it again. Owen didn't say anything. Just took it, gentle as if it were breath itself, and tucked it into the shelf beside his mother's old ledger and the tin of tobacco he never used. Later that day, Clara stood in the garden plot with her hands buried in the drying soil. Why don't things grow in the cold? Tilly knelt beside her. Because they're sleeping, waiting for the right time. Some seeds need the cold to crack open. Clara nodded solemnly, then buried a walnut in the dirt. I'll check it tomorrow. Owen joined them with 2 fence posts slung over his shoulder. We'll have to wait longer than that, he said, crouching beside them. But if we're patient, it might just grow into something taller than all of us. Clara looked up. Even taller than you. Even taller than me, he said, touching the brim of his hat with a finger. That night, Tilly lit the oil lamp early. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters, and Clara had gone quiet with sleep before supper. Owen returned from the barn with his shoulders dusted white. Snow's coming, he said, setting his gloves by the stove. I know, she replied, handing him his bowl. They ate in silence for a while, the cabin filled with the low hum of wind and the creak of the old rocker shifting slightly on the floorboards. Then Tilly said, "I want Clara to learn to read." Owen looked up. "I can teach her my letters. Got a reader somewhere from my schooling. She needs more than letters." Tilly's voice was steady. "She needs a life that doesn't start with running." Owen set down his spoon. "Then we'll build one for her." Together, she reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "You already have." Outside, the snow began to fall in earnest, soft and slow, blanketing the world in quiet. Inside, the three of them sat together near the fire, the warmth holding steady, the silence full of something that no storm could touch. By late November, the first snow had held. Not a dusting, but a thick, wet fall that blanketed every fence post, every tree limb, every window ledge. Tilly stood at the stove, easing the lid off a simmering kettle of barley and onion, while Owen worked by lamplight at the table, sharpening the blade of the draw knife he used to carve fence rails. Clara sat on a bearskin by the hearth, arranging small stones into a wide circle, her brow furrowed in concentration. She said the smallest one's the grandmother. Owen murmured, glancing over his shoulder. "And the middle ones are hunting buffalo." Tilly stirred the pot. "She's never seen buffalo." "No," he said, setting the blade down. "But she knows they matter." The kettle hissed. Tilly poured water into a tin basin and added a pinch of lye soap, then lowered a rag into it. "I think we should teach her how to make lard candles this winter. She's got careful hands." "She's got your hands," Owen said. Tilly looked at him. "You've never seen what they've done." "I've seen what they hold." She didn't reply, but her chest ached in that soft way it sometimes did when he said things he didn't seem to know the weight of. She wrung out the rag and began wiping down the counter, her movements unhurried. After supper, Owen pulled on his coat and stepped out to the barn to check the roofline. Clara was asleep by the fire, her stones forgotten, the bearskin pulled around her shoulders. Tilly tucked a quilt over her and sat down in the rocker, listening to the wind pushing snow from the eaves. When Owen returned, his cheeks red from the cold, he rubbed his hands by the fire, then sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "There's a man who comes through once every winter," he said. "Traps beaver and mink up in the Gallatins. Stops by for coffee and a place to sleep when it's too deep to ride through." She watched him closely. "You expecting him soon?" He shook his head. "No, just thinking." He ran a hand along his jaw. "He's never had a family. Says he likes it that way. But there's a lonesomeness in him that sticks. Like the cold gets deeper in his bones every year." Tilly let the silence settle, then said, "You're not like him." "No," he said. "I was, but not anymore." She reached over and touched his wrist. "I don't want to be a guest in your life. I want to build something that we both claim." His eyes met hers, and he leaned in, just enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "Then let's stop talking around it." She nodded. "I want to stay. I want to marry you, Owen. If you'll have me." He exhaled once, slow and steady. "There hasn't been a day since I found you on that trail that I haven't wanted that. You and Clara both." "We don't have much," she said. "Not in the way of ceremony or fine things. We've got the land," he said. "We've got our hands. We've got fire and food and a place to sleep. That's more than most." They married 2 mornings later, wrapped in wool and standing beneath the bare limbs of an aspen behind the barn. Owen's neighbor, an old widow named Edna who'd once run a schoolhouse, read from a Bible she'd kept since childhood. Clara held a sprig of dried yarrow tied with twine. The vows were brief. The kiss was not. That afternoon, Clara insisted on setting 3 places at the table, arranging the spoons just so. Tilly made oat cakes and poured blackberry preserves from a jar she'd saved. Owen split hickory for the hearth and hung a string of dried apples across the mantel. When night fell, they sat together near the fire, Clara curled between them, her head against Owen's thigh, her thumb tucked beneath her chin. Tilly rested her hand on his. "Do you think she'll remember this? Years from now?" "She will," he said. "And if she doesn't, we'll remind her." Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the cabin held warmth not just in heat, but in the shape of their lives folding together 3 voices, 1 home. Years passed, and seasons turned. Clara grew tall and sure-footed, with a braid down her back and a fondness for trapping hares like Owen had taught her. She learned to sew and read, and when she asked about her father, Tilly sat with her and offered the truth gently, without shadow. The girl's eyes were steady as she listened, then reached for her mother's hand. Owen built a second room onto the cabin the following spring, whitewashed and bright, with shelves for Tilly's root jars and Clara's drawings. They planted squash and onion, and Owen fashioned a wooden swing from a fallen limb. Tilly sang while she kneaded bread, and when the wind stirred the curtains, she would pause and look out at the ridge, her heart no longer restless. Every choice, every bruise, every mile behind her had led here. And here was good. She woke each morning to the sound of wood being chopped, or Clara's quiet steps near the hearth, or Owen's voice low and rough with sleep. She no longer counted the days since she'd run. She counted the mornings that began with peace. They grew older together. Not fast, but sure. The land taught them patience. The seasons taught them to move with care. And love, the kind that asked nothing but gave everything, taught them what it meant to belong. They never left the homestead. They never needed to.